So if it's all right with everyone, we'll just start off with a little prayer, because I don't ever teach about this without praying a little first. So just close your eyes for me. And we're just going to invite the Holy Spirit to be upon us. Because here we are, gathered in the presence and power of each other's love, so that we may be lifted from any fear, from any suffering, to the joy and to the peace that lay beyond. And just take a minute to send some love to yourself and to bless everyone else in this room. And we pray for the happiness of everybody in London, of everybody on this planet, of everybody on the earth. And we ask that love be upon them too. And that where the divine physician is needed, that where any illness is present, that an instant healing occur. And we send out a message to all the people in our lives who are looking for answers or peace, that are looking for that light of the divine that's within them. And let them know that the answers are right here, that they are deeply loved. And we dedicate this evening and all of our relationships here tonight and all of our time together to the universe, to the creator of all that is, and to the Holy Spirit. And we ask that we be used for love's holiest purposes, and that tonight we be instruments of love and peace. And together we all say Amen.
Amen.
Okay. So pop up your hands for me if you've had any exposure to the Course in Miracles before. Okay. So who actually practices the Course in Miracles? Who gets up every morning and does the workbook every day? Okay. And who, and I know this is a hard question because most people say no to this, but has anybody read the text? Okay. So the Course in Miracles is a spiritual mind training. It's not a religion. It doesn't claim to have any monopoly on truth whatsoever. But it's a course designed to train your mind from a fearful mindset to a loving mindset. And it's based on, it says itself that it's based on spiritual principles. So it's a big text. So the text itself is about 600 pages long. It's not the kind of book you can read a couple of chapters of before bed. It's the kind of book you read a couple of paragraphs and your mind boggles for a while. And there's no order in which you have to do the books. You know, there's not book 1, book 2, or book 3. The only thing is whatever book you start, the course asks that you finish it in order. And it says very humorously that if you jump backwards and forwards, it might do more damage than good. It's just because it's a very powerful book. And I remember my first exposure to the course was almost 8 years ago now. It was when I first woke up and I read Doreen Virtue's book, The Light Worker's Way. Has anybody read that book?
I'm familiar with her, but not.
Well, in that book she talks about A Course in Miracles, and I'd just woken up and I didn't know what it was. And I read the bits of A Course in Miracles, and I read the book of Christian Science, which is even more intense than A Course in Miracles in different ways. It's like a dive into the deep end of metaphysics. But A Course in Miracles really stuck with me. And at first the text didn't make any sense to me whatsoever. So I put it under my bed. And I used to sleep with it. I did sleep with it under my pillow for a good 2 years before I was ready to read the text. But the workbook touched me from the word go. It makes a lot of sense to me because it's one phrase, basically, that you do every day, one meditation. And the Course says that 5 minutes of meditation in the morning with your mind in the presence of the Holy Spirit is enough to ensure His presence will be with you throughout the day. So it's an opening of the mind, the shifting of a thought system from one of fear to one of love. And I actually have 3 copies of the Course in Miracles, all highlighted and notepadded to within an inch of their lives. All of them in here at the moment, because normally they're kept where the bathroom is. But thanks to Kindle and the internet, it's on my Kindle, which is what I'm going to be using to refer and quote from it to you guys tonight. It's only £7 on the Kindle. It's £30 to buy hardback. It is a big book. It's about, proper solid book. And I used to carry it around with me in my backpack. I still do, but the Kindle makes it a lot lighter and a lot easier. It's also on Audible. It's also free online. Literally, you can go online, click lesson 1. It will take you to a free page with the lesson, and then it will have on top this little audio that says, read audio out loud. So it just reads the lesson to you.
It's also on YouTube.
Yep, it's on YouTube. It's on Marianne Williamson's website. So if you go onto Marianne Williamson's website, it's something like £30, and she will send you her reading out the lessons every single day of the year. From when you sign up, and there's a lot of amazing people teaching about it. My 2 favorite teachers are Marianne Williamson and Gabrielle Bernstein, but I am, a young woman, and that's where the connection is. There are other amazing teachers of the Course around, and I think the more you explore, the quicker it starts to open to you. It's a study. Everybody has a spiritual practice, and I think in our culture, especially in Western culture, we don't value practice as much as we should. We kind of tend to skip the bits that actually involve showing up every day and doing the little bits of work. Light needs to be held. Marianne Williamson describes us as lamps. And she says that we're all like lamps, and that it's the electricity that runs through the house that allows a lamp to shine. And unless we take those 5 minutes to plug in the morning, that our light can't be switched on. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Now, a light can be plugged in and not be switched on, which is what happens when spiritual superiority gets in the way, which is what happens when we have our own wounds or blocks. But just the act of plugging a light in makes it a lot more able to hold the light. But if it didn't have a light bulb, which is our character, as it were, there would be nothing for the electricity to shine through. There would be no way for that light to be expressed into the world. And that light bulb is our physical body. We are all unique. We all cast different kinds of light. We are all different spectrums and shades and colours. But yeah, the Course in Miracles is made up of 3 books. So there's the text, there's the manual for students, and there's the manual for teachers. Okay? I've already explained to you what the workbook for students is. The text is a big book, and you can, normally I try and read about 2 pages of it a day as I'm going along, but go at your own pace. And I find that the first time you read it, don't expect to understand it. Not because you won't understand parts of it, but because the mind plays games with what you're reading. And you think, I thought I read that, but actually something else you read, and there will be other bits that stick out at you and that just stick with your soul. Like there's a part of the Course, there's a few phrases of the Course in Miracles that I'll go into tonight, but my favourite phrase in A Course in Miracles is about the holy instant. And the holy instant is basically the Course in Miracles way of talking about the eternal now, so the eternal timeless state, which is what all of reality and all of illusion is built upon. And there's a place in the Course in Miracles where it says the holiest instant is the place where an ancient hatred becomes a present love. And that, for me, that it makes me happy no matter how down I am, because it's just, there are things that you read and they don't just resound in your mind, they resound in your heart and in your soul, and they turn silence into peace. There are different kinds of silences, and there's something amazing about the power of words. How beautiful they are. It's quite an interesting beginning. So I brought this up for you guys. Bear with me, because this is actually my first time teaching this. I'm just going to go back to the first chapter. I still remember opening this book at 19 and thinking, what the hell is this? Okay? So this is the introduction to A Course in Miracles. This is A Course in Miracles. It is a required course. Only the time you take it is voluntary. Free will does not mean you can establish the curriculum. It means only that you can elect what you want to take at any given time. The Course does not aim at teaching the meaning of love, for that is beyond what can be taught. It does aim, however, at removing the blocks to the awareness of love's presence, which is your natural inheritance. The opposite of love is fear, but what is all-encompassing can have no opposite. Okay? I remember picking this up when I was 19 and thinking, who the hell wrote this book? Giving it a good turnaround, throwing it at things. And if you're reading A Course in Miracles and you don't throw it at the wall a few times, it's because you're not reading it. It does have a way of moving things in your psyche and in your life, and of challenging your perception of people and of things in a radical way. So I'm going to start at the beginning, and I'm going to move slowly through the basic principles. And I'll probably do another talk in about 2 weeks' time on basic principles part 2, because they're advanced principles, so I'm not going to try and shove everything into one night. We're going to take it slow, and then we're going to have like a question session. And hopefully it will inspire you to take your practice with that book to a deeper level, because it's an amazing book. It's definitely saved my health, my marriage on many occasions, my friendships, my career, because it gives you that courage and that stillness to be able to come from a loving place, instead of thinking you're coming from a loving place when really it's just, hatred or fear masquerading as love. Because vulnerability is a hard thing to get around sometimes. So basically what the Course in Miracles teaches is that there are two minds. There's a mind of fear and there's a mind of love. Now in A Course in Miracles they talk about the difference between knowledge and perception. And in A Course in Miracles, perception is the fear mind and knowledge is the loving mind. So it's all about the eternal truth. It's always constant and never changes. So anyone here ever been told that if you're getting divine guidance from your angels or from your guides, it stays the same? It doesn't change? Yeah? Normally it repeats itself over and over. That's a sign that something is knowledge, because it doesn't matter how many lifetimes you lived. It doesn't matter how many situations you've been through. The application of the principle is the same. Does that make sense to everybody? Okay. So, and perception is when there's degrees of truth. It's how we see things through layers and layers of our own beliefs, our own emotion, our own projection, and it makes things confusing. It comes from a belief that we are the S with little self. So the Course in Miracles teaches that the fear mind is the ego, and that's what it calls the fear mind. Now there's two different kinds of ego in the world. There's the Greek ego and there's the Freudian ego. So when the Course in Miracles talks about the ego, they're talking about the Greek ego, which is the small separate self. Okay, so they're talking about the idea of you're being separate from other human beings, as opposed to Freud's idea of the ego, which is your sense of identity, your personality traits that make up who you are, which is what we'd call kind of like your sub-personalities grouped together. Okay, so when people are saying to you, love your ego, they're talking about loving your different selves, loving your sub-personality. When the Course in Miracles talks about the ego, it's okay? When the Course in Miracles talks about the ego, it talks about something far older than a personality built in this lifetime. The ego, just like the Holy Spirit, has been around long before you were born, and will be around in other human beings long after we are dead. It's far older than we are. It's a force for fear, just like the Holy Spirit is a force for love. Does that make sense to everybody? Yeah? So, the way I like to explain it is that when you're little, there's actually the cutest experiment on the planet where they figure out when children realize that they are a separate self. And they did this by putting lipstick on the mum's nose, and then bless their hearts, they got the kids to try and wipe the lipstick off. Now until kids are about 2 years old, they try and wipe the lipstick off their own nose. Okay? We don't have a sense of separate self. When we do, those are normally our moments of terror. Okay, and the reason I'm using that to explain is because have you ever seen a kid dropped off at nursery for the first time and they're absolute panic? Yeah? Or even if they're an infant and they're taken away from their mother's arms and how they scream. Well, A Course in Miracles says that how we feel about our separation from God is over 1 million times more intense panic than that infant feels its separation from its parent. It's a deep existential pain that runs through the body of humanity, which is what Eckhart Tolle talks about as the pain body. Yeah? Everybody's with me? Mm-hmm. Okay. So That's the ego mind. So when you're little, until about the age of 2, you don't realize that you are a separate self. You think you are one with your parents. You're still in that oneness with all of creation. Okay? And as you start to realize you have a separate self, you start to be afraid. So you really go into that deep existential pain when you realize that there's an I as well as an us. So in A Course in Miracles, it explains that the body and the physical reality is the biggest, I suppose, persuader in the ego's toolbox. Because you have no idea how confusing it is for the spirit that I'm sitting over here and you're sitting over there. Okay? Because that affirms every minute of every day that we are separate. Okay, there's a me and there's a you and we're completely separate. Okay? Now, the senses lie to us all the time. The same way that when an airplane takes off and goes off into the distance, our mind tells us it gets smaller. It doesn't actually get smaller, it just got further away, right? And just because our senses are telling me that I'm over here and you're over there, doesn't mean I'm over here and you're over there. Because all is infinite mind and all minds are infinitely joined. And that's why when you get down even to the science we've gotten to today, we know that we're all just atoms vibrating at different frequencies. We don't know why we stick together. It's a different question entirely. And the Course in Miracles addresses that as what they call a hierarchy question, so divine hierarchy. But in that moment that you realize as a little kid that you are separate from God, that's the moment that the ego comes into the equation. And it's also, in theory, the moment that the whole universe was born. So the Course in Miracles says that the whole universe, the whole of this illusion, was created in an instant. And in A Course in Miracles it said it was created the moment the Son of God forgot to laugh. Okay? And it's just the idea of being born in a consciousness separate from all that is, that we could be separate. And that's what the small separate self is. It's just the idea that we are small separate beings. So self with a big S is the idea that, yes, we are all separate beings, but we are all one. And self with a small s is the idea that we're all completely separate all the time, no matter what. Okay? So A Course in Miracles says that we are like sunbeams thinking that we are separate from the sun. We are like waves thinking we are separate from the ocean. Okay? And if you're a wave in the ocean, thinking that you're separate from all the other waves, you're terrified, right? Because there's waves that are way bigger than you in the ocean, and they can engulf you any 5 seconds, and in 2 minutes you'll disappear and there'll be another wave coming along, right? But when you get that you are one with this powerful thing, and where it goes, you go, and that it's got you, literally it's holding you all of the time, and that it's taking care of you, that existential energy starts to melt away. Okay, so the moment that ego mentality was created, whether it's way back in the beginning of time when life itself began, or whether it's in an infant's life when we realize, oh my God, I'm not one with other human beings. I have a separate body, I have a separate being. In this incarnation, I have a separate soul. God always answers every single question. There's no prayer left unanswered. So the moment we said, I'm alone in our own minds, He responded by creating the Holy Spirit. Okay? So when you're alone, what the ego will do is it will say, I'm alone, I'm terrified, I don't know what to do. It's lonely on this planet, I can't figure it out, I can't connect with anybody, I'm isolated. And the ego is both the thing that sets you up for the fall and the thing that then kicks you when you fall down. Okay? And there's a lot of confusion around this because a lot of people think that the part of you that's giving you a hard time when you fell down, that's your guidance, right? That's God judging you or speaking to you. That's someone whipping you into shape, yeah? You need to kick up the ass. How many times have you heard that? I just need to be, it's that energy of I need to be beaten when I'm down to get me to shape up quicker. It's quite common in sports. That is not love talking, okay? But it's that moment. So that when you're little, that the ego will set you up. And it will set you up by saying, okay, you're all alone on this planet and you're terrified that you're going to be alone forever. And it doesn't say you're part of the ocean, you're part of the sun, you're part of humanity. You're one with everything. It says there is one person out there. There is one person out there, and when you find them, they will complete you. Does that make sense? Okay? Now, it does that because when you believe that it's someone else who will complete you, that sabotages your ability to create love with somebody else. Does that make sense? Yeah? So it sets you up by saying that person will complete you, because the behavior that would have you demand that someone else completes you will sabotage that person from being able to give you love. And when they can't give you love, you can't connect. And because you can't receive it. Even if they really do love you, you don't believe them because they didn't complete you. The ego calls this the frame. It says that the ego has a frame that we try and put people in, and that the rubies are made of blood and that the diamonds are made of tears. And that we try and fit people into what we think they should be. And how many times have we done that in intimate relationships? They don't measure up the way we think they should measure up, right? They're not who we thought they should be in our heads. So here we are trying to change them, make them fit into the frame, instead of learning how to love who that person really is sitting in front of us, right? It happens even with ourselves. How many times have you looked in the mirror? There's a book. Anybody read a book by a woman called Araya the Mountain Dreamer? She writes in her book a really deep phrase that's relevant here. That's the question is not why we're not who we want to be. The question is why we don't want to be who we are. And that, for me, exemplifies what the Course in Miracles says by that frame that it puts people in. Because we don't want to be who we are. We want to fit into that frame. Anything to fit into that frame. Right? Anything to not have to love the person standing in front of us. When I get that job, when I get that relationship, when I get that money, when that person changes, when I lose 10 pounds, then I'll love myself. So that's what the Course in Miracles is talking about when it says we have a frame. Does that make sense to everybody? Yeah? Because the ego's dictate, it says in A Course in Miracles, is seek and do not find. So it will give you the behavior that says, yes, I am looking for this person, I'm looking for the relationship, I'm looking to be of service to the planet, and then it will give you behaviors that will sabotage your ability to find it. And then it will tell you, love just isn't real. It just doesn't exist. Right? It's an illusion. And you hear a lot that love is the illusion. And particularly at the beginning of intimate relationships. Even in psychological circles, how many times have you heard it said that beginning stage, that romantic stage, is just crazy, it's insanity, it's not supposed to last, right? And A Course in Miracles says the opposite. A Course in Miracles says that when we meet someone, we are lifted by the grace of the Holy Spirit. We see them for 6 months or 6 weeks or 6 days as they truly are, which is perfect, whole, and complete. As we would if we had no barriers to loving them completely. And then our stuff sets in, right? And it doesn't set in to punish us in any way. It sets in because the same way that a jeweler, when he's given a gemstone, has to rub gemstones together in order to get them to be clear, in order to get all the rough edges off, we rub against one another to get our rough edges off, to smooth ourselves. Does that make sense to everybody? So me and Todd, for example, because we're both soulmates and we're married now, we have exact opposite childhood wounds. So that he will rub up where my childhood wounds are and I will rub up where his childhood wounds are. And in that moment, because the Course in Miracles says relationships are incubators of the Holy Spirit. Okay? In that moment, if we choose to give our wounds to the Holy Spirit, if we choose to invite love in, then our wound will be healed. In the presence of each other, we will not just become gifts to one another, we'll become the gifts that we're capable of being for the planet. Does that make sense? But in that same moment, used for the ego's purposes, we can use each other to make the wounds deeper. Okay? But if you don't have that awareness, if you don't understand that in the presence of love, everything unlike love will be brought to the surface, then when that stuff comes up, the ego turns around to you and goes, I'm just not supposed to be with that person. Right? And then it moves on to the next one. And I'm not saying you're not supposed to be with that person, because it's a different question entirely. What I'm saying is, if when that issue is brought to the surface, you aren't 100% responsible and you don't surrender that issue over to the light, the next person you meet will bring up that issue again. Because what the Course in Miracles teaches is that it's not about the other person. It's about how we dwell in the moment. It's about how we dwell with each other. Does that make sense to everybody? Yeah? So in that moment where the ego was created, God created, or the universe created the Holy Spirit. And the Holy Spirit is the exact opposite. The Holy Spirit is the bit that says to you, when, for example, you've had a fight with your partner, What are you not giving? What was lacking in that situation? So it gets you to look at yourself first. Okay, it never points the finger at someone else first. And that's one of the things I love about A Course in Miracles, is that it says, you know, you're not here to police the universe. I'm not here to monitor your spiritual progress. You are not here to monitor mine. We're here to love one another. Yeah? And that's the most tempting thing to do. That's where judgment comes from. And judgment is the root of all suffering. Because judgment is the cornerstone of the ego's belief system, which is that your brother is guilty. Does that make sense? It's that there's something wrong with them, right? And it comes out in insidious ways, and judgment likes to masquerade itself as righteousness. It likes to show up and be like, but they really did do that wrong. You know, what were they thinking? How could they say that? How could they do that? Right? I'm just trying to protect other people. But if you think about love as light, then the only thing powerful enough to eradicate darkness is the presence of light. So when the ego says to you, oh, you know, in the presence of someone else's fear, be fearful too, that's the equivalent of saying, you want light in this room, go around, turn all the lights off. Right? It doesn't make any sense. And that's why in A Course in Miracles it says that we are insane. That's why Gandhi says that what's wrong with this world is that it's not of its right mind. Is because in that moment we're trying to create more light and switching off all the lights. Does that resonate with everybody? Yeah? So in that space where we're met with challenges, and the Course in Miracles says that everybody's curriculum is highly individual. So my course is completely different from your course, is completely different from your course. The only thing you can be sure of is that every day you will be given the option to choose the love mind or the fear mind. And the more you practice, the more you work through the workbook, the more you work through A Course in Miracles, the clearer your mind becomes, and the less time the insanity has to set in. And in the beginning, you start to develop spiritual integrity. You start to develop fundamental values. You start to develop virtues. You start to develop discipline, because you have to sit every day and do the lesson whether you like it or not. You know, you start to see things differently. You know, for example, you know, when it's talking about judgment, and you've you know, someone's really done something, you know, unacceptable to you, or you've had a fight with parents or with a partner, and you know, you open that page, and the Course in Miracles pretty much says to you, you know, what are you not giving? And all you want to do is throw it at the wall, and all you want to do is never look at that book again. And when it says to you, you need to atone for your mistakes, you need to be accountable for your part and 100% responsible for your creations, those are difficult things. Those are grown-up things. Does that make sense to everybody? And we live in a culture that's still very caught up in spiritual childhood. A lot of different faiths have taught us that we are eternally children. And a lot of people say to me, you know, aren't you afraid of leaning on God? Aren't you afraid of leaning on a book so heavily? And A Course in Miracles says, if you do not learn to lean on that light inside you, you will lean on someone or something else inappropriately. Which is exactly what happens in intimate relationships. If I'm not okay first thing in the morning, and I don't take those 5 minutes to give my mind to the presence of love that morning, if I don't take those 5 minutes to pray for Todd's happiness, if I don't take those 5 minutes to connect up, to plug myself in, then chances are fear's got my mind, and it's going to run with my mind throughout the day. Does that make sense to everybody? Because we as humanity, we've created, the predominant thought system is currently based on fear. All I have to do in the morning is get up and switch on my phone, and I'm bombarded with violence. Whether I look at Facebook, whether I watch the news, whether I open books, it's instant either violence or sexuality. It's the moment you switch on anything. Does that make sense to everybody? So you don't have to proactively give your mind to fear. You just have to do nothing. And A Course in Miracles teaches in one of the lessons that there's no such thing as a neutral thought. So we go around often thinking that if we just do nothing, if we just sit on the fence, then that's fine. Fear won't dominate in our lives. But love is a proactive thing. Love is not a neutral thing. Does that make sense to everybody? You know, nobody wants their lover to be neutral about them, right? No one wants their kids to be neutral about them. Nobody wants, on the day of your funeral, you don't want people going, meh, You know, nobody wants neutrality. People in their hearts want love, right? They crave it with everything that they have. And they don't crave my love or your love. They crave that deep love, which is the connection with everything that is. Okay? And that comes from our ability to be in the holy instant and our ability to be in the moment. Now, in those moments, when you're faced with a decision between love and fear, you don't normally know you're being faced with that decision. So you make it from an unconscious place. And from that, the ego will turn around to you and say, but I didn't do anything and something bad happened, right? And from that place of I didn't do anything and something bad happened, you give away your power completely. And this is why in Alcoholics Anonymous and in grief, does anyone know what the first stages are? Because they're the same. Denial. Yeah. So in Alcoholics Anonymous, the first thing is denial, and grief, the first thing is denial. Now denial is a very nice word for you're lying to yourself. Okay? And the subconscious mind lies to itself to protect itself because anybody knows that the truth hurts. Yeah? It takes a certain level of emotional musculature to be able to hold the truth with maturity. Exactly because it requires growth. Okay? And nobody likes having growth demanded of them. So it requires such a gentleness to convey the truth with love and with peace. Marianne Williamson's always saying that the word communicate has the word commune in it. You know, so communication is based on our ability to commune with one another. And the word communion comes from common union, right? Our ability to recognize our common union with one another, to see each other as brothers and sisters. And obviously, you know, I don't go around meeting strange people in the street or going to meetings or, you know, counseling people in my practice and saying to them, yes, you know, I'm going to give you over to the Holy Spirit right now, because the language doesn't matter. It's not about spiritual superiority. It's not about getting attention. The love is what matters. Does that make sense? And that's why the Course in Miracles says it doesn't have a monopoly on truth. I only talk about A Course in Miracles to people who ask me or who are open to it, or who ask me, what's your spiritual path? You know, what do you do? Because everybody has their own spiritual path and all the different paths will lead them home. So it's not about what you do, it's about the love you're able to give in that situation. So if me telling someone that I do the Course in Miracles is going to bring fear into that room, I'm not talking about it. Does that make sense? Yeah? You just want to be literally a vessel for love's peace and for joy and for presence, and to hopefully end the suffering of the person sitting next to you. And you'll be surprised, even in this room right now, just how much the person sitting next to you is suffering. Because we're very good at putting on a brave face. And I work with people day in, day out to help them end emotional and spiritual suffering. And the stories you hear really break down I think one of the biggest guns in the ego's arsenal, which is, I suffer alone and no one else has it as bad as me. Okay? Because in those spaces of isolation, shame breeds. If you think you're worse than everybody else, if you think you're the only person having a hard time getting up in the morning, or, you know, looking in the mirror, or fixing, you know, your career or your relationship, you're not. Everyone sitting in this room right now faces the exact same challenges you do every single day. And that's why we need to be so gentle and so compassionate and so kind and careful with one another. Because you just never know what is going on with the person sitting next to you. Okay? So, our job on this planet, according to the Course in Miracles, is to basically be vehicles of love and light. Now there's 3 stages to that. So the first stage, when you first start working, whatever practice it is, whether it's A Course in Miracles, whether it's Buddhism, whether it's Hinduism, whether it's Judaism, whether it's Christianity, is self-actualization. And this is normally characterized by a stage of intense study. So you'll find people doing either a lot of training or a lot of very focused meditation, and they'll just suddenly take off in a particular direction. It's often called an awakening. Right? But it's a stage of you remembering who you are in this lifetime. It's the first time that you go, I'm not my physical body. And that's what enlightenment is. It's a shift from body identification to spirit identification. That's what it's called in A Course in Miracles. It's also called, it's another one of my favorite lessons, a journey without distance between the mind and the heart. So it's that journey of enlightenment from body identification to spirit identification. So in the beginning, we identify with our physical body and we believe that this is all we are. This is me, that's you over there, and we're separate beings. And when you awaken, you remember that you are not your physical body, that you are a spirit. And I think that's the only way to be happy on this planet, is to know that you are not of it. Marianne Williamson says that even the deepest roots of this planet are too shallow for who you really are. That you are so beautiful, that you have been through so many different lifetimes and universes and incarnations, that's why so many of us on this planet feel like we're aliens here. Because we're not from here, we're here for a very short time. Even the whole of humanity is here for a very short time. For us, it feels like an eternity right now, but it's an instant in the life of the universe. I think it's less than an instant sometimes. And that consciousness that you are will change form, and it will keep flowing. So we are identified with the body right now, but the body was not made for us to be identified with it. And when we're identified with it, it puts a lot of stress on the physical body. And that's what the Course in Miracles says is the cause of illness and dis-ease in the body, is our over-identification with the physicality. Does that make sense to everybody? So it's not that your body is bad in any way, shape or form. It's just that the Course in Miracles says it doesn't exist. It's the same thing with the world. It's not that the universe is bad or that the world is evil, it's just that it's not real. Now, the fact that it's not real outside of time and space does not mean that you and I will not experience it as very real within time and space. Yeah? Well, the Course in Miracles says time and space are illusions of consciousness, so does Einstein. But that does not mean that it's not occasionally a very painful and also a very joyful illusion. Now,
Can I ask a question? Sorry.
Yeah, go on,
I
Kelly.
don't understand how it's an illusion.
Or time and space.
Well, yeah, a little bit.
Physics-wise, time and space are relative. So we've kind of created a consensus that humanity has decided that, even it's, 8 p.m. now, and over in Lisbon it's another time now, but it's all based on perception. When we're gone, the idea of time won't exist anymore. And space, it's kind of like inside your cell you have 1 billion atoms, right? And how many grains of sand are on a beach? How much love can you fit into an instant? If you've ever looked into the eyes of a dying person, it's seriously intense. Because they go into this state of peace, which is absolutely unreal. And it feels like all the love in a lifetime in a moment. Sometimes it's the birth of a child, but it's like, have you ever had a moment where you feel so much, you have no idea how your body is containing all of that feeling? It's like time and space are relative, which is why for example, if I were to go into space as an astronaut and I come back, I could still be the same age, but people here have aged 40 years. Does that make sense? That's relativity. I'm not going to go deeper into that because it's physics, and I'm not good at physics. But that's the extent of they really are illusions. They're completely relative to the planet and the solar system and the space and the physical body or energy that you're in. But that's how they're illusions of consciousness. The Course in Miracles says that there is no order of difficulty in miracles. That's actually the first thing that it says after the introduction, is that there's no order of difficulty in miracles. Which basically means that there's to God, to the creator of all that is, there is no difference between me being irritated at you because you said something I didn't like and you having killed someone I love. The ability to move that energy is a miracle, and the energy required to move it is an instant. There's no order of difficulty in miracles. That's just perception. Does that make sense to everybody? The Course in Miracles also says that you won't like or understand all of the concepts that it teaches you. It says that that's not required. All that's required is that basically you do the lessons every day and that the acceptance will come. And it cannot be forced. It's what it says, love is beyond what can be taught. So is peace. So is real forgiveness. It's beyond what can be taught. It's something that has to be experienced in the body. Knowing intellectually what forgiveness is, knowing intellectually what enlightenment is, it's not the real thing. It's an experience. It's 100% an experience. It's a way of being. And for me, I practice yoga almost every day, a minimum of like 3 or 4 times a week. And when I'm doing yoga, it's a very humbling experience at the same time as being a very amusing experience, because it often shows me the difference between my mind, what my mind thinks it can do, and what I'm actually capable of doing, right? So at the moment, my New Year's resolutions are to learn how to do the splits, to learn how to stand on my head. I learned that one by now, but I'm still halfway on the splits, and to learn how to do a handstand, okay? Now, learning how to stand on my head took me 4 weeks. I thought I'd do it in 1 day. And I spent the whole day falling over. The splits has been an exercise in humility, because I've realized how much anger and resentment I'm holding in my hips. I've spent hours crying after practicing the splits because of how much emotion and tension is being held in there, how much lack of surrender is still in the physical body. And it showed me that sometimes just because you want to be somewhere emotionally or spiritually or have that muscle built does not mean you are. So it's teaching me mercy, and it's teaching me patience with other people as well as myself. Does that make sense? Yeah? So that part of me that wants to force me to do the splits in 1 day, that gets angry that I'm not there yet, that's the bit that comes up when I'm trying to do yoga, but that's also the bit that comes up when my partner says something I don't like, and when I'm trying to write a report and it's not finished on time, and when I'm working with a client and they haven't done their homework, right? It's the same part that comes up over and over again, and this is what I mean by knowledge. Because when you ask for help, because that's the other thing that happens, is that when, I'll go back to the wave in the ocean, that moment that you realize you're separate, the Holy Spirit is created, but so is free will, okay? So there's a hierarchy to all living things, in the sense that, you know, an embryo doesn't have to try to become a baby. An acorn doesn't have to try to become an oak tree. You know, it just happens naturally, unfolds as a part of life. An egg doesn't have to try to become a chicken. It just happens. It's a natural unfolding. A flower doesn't have to will itself to blossom. It just has to open itself to what's already there, right? It's a natural stage in progression. And the same way that those processes are intentional, the universe's process for our mind is intentional. The universe's intention for everyone, it says in A Course in Miracles, is that we will be our happiest self-actualized self in this lifetime. Does that make sense? Right. So when we're dealing with this idea of it being self-actualized, we have free will. So when you want a miracle in your life, the embryo can't say, I don't want to be a baby. The acorn can't say, I don't want to be an oak tree, F off. Right? It happens as part of a natural process. I mean, you can stamp your feet and say, you know, I don't want to be an adult, but you're going to grow up. Does that make sense to everybody? There are some things which are just part of the unfoldment of life itself. But when you, when we start to interfere in our own minds and our own processes, that's when we block miracles from happening. So the Course in Miracles says miracles are natural, where they do not happen by themselves. It's because there has been something has gone wrong. Literally, it says when they don't happen by themselves, naturally it's because something has gone wrong, which means we have put a block to love's coming. Okay? So mostly we're not aware of that block. Nobody wakes up in the morning and thinks, today I'm going to do my damnedest to piss off my partner. Today I'm going to really, you know, scream at my boss and lose my job. Today is the day that I will not pick up the phone when someone really important is calling me and miss that opportunity. Nobody wakes up in the morning and thinks they're going to do those things. Does that make sense? Nobody thinks today's the day I'm going to cheat on my partner. It just happens because we haven't given our day to love's purposes. Does that make sense to everybody? So the moment, A Course in Miracles says that prayer is the medium of miracles. Basically prayer and meditations. That's why you get the 365 meditations. And that's why you get taught to pray inside the Course. So prayer is that moment where you basically surrender your will to divine will. It's that will with a little s becoming, that will with a little w becoming will with a big W. It's that moment that you realize that this physical body, that this small separate self actually has no idea what would make you happy. Does that make sense to everybody? And I've had people, this is because we've had a lot of religious abuse in this area, I've had a lot of people say to me, what if God would take everything away from me? What if he asks me never to play the piano again and I'm a musician? What if he asks me never to paint again, and I'm an artist? What if he asks me to completely change what I'm doing? And what I always say to them is, who do you think gave you the ability to paint? Who do you think put that innate ability in you to sing or to play the piano in there? There's no part of the divine that's going to say to you, stop expressing beauty and love on this planet. Love doesn't do that. Love cherishes those things, because the more you shine brightly, the more you remind other people that they are a light that can shine brightly too. It's what Marianne Williamson says, with, you say, who am I to shine brightly? And she says, who are you not to? Who are you not to be brilliant and wonderful and to be the light that you're capable of being in this world for the instant that you were alive on it? And it's that moment. So that moment where you say, because that's what the Course in Miracles tells you to do. So let's say I'm working on loneliness, for example, and I say, dear universe, I'm really struggling with this. I feel so lonely. I want to curl up into a ball on the floor and die. I don't feel like I belong here. I don't want to be here anymore. Okay? It doesn't instantly get fixed unless I'm aware of what I'm doing that blocks connection with other people. Does that make sense? So what's going to happen, and this is why the Course says you should do it in order, because it builds your muscles in a way that you can handle this, is that every single thing that could make me lonely is going to show up between the time I make that prayer and 6 o'clock that evening. Okay? And it's not showing up to piss you off. It's not showing up to torture you. It's showing up to awaken you. It's literally the universe, the moment you do that, the Holy Spirit, which is inside your mind, is given permission to shine a light in every area in which you are keeping love at bay. Does that make sense to everybody? Right? And it's every time that comes up, you say to the universe, okay, I'm willing to see this. I'm willing to be with this. I'm asking for your healing to be upon this. I'm willing to be with this. Then it starts to change. That's when the miracles happen. Because a miracle is a shift in perspective from fear to love. Does that make sense? So when I ask to be released of my loneliness, I'm going to be shown my contempt for other human beings. I'm going to be shown my belief that I'm either better than or worse than other people. I'm going to be shown my beliefs in separation and where I use judgment to draw the line. Does that make sense? Because only when I say, take this from me, can that be taken from me without my free will being damaged. Does that make sense to everybody? Yeah? Because the universe is not just going to come in and do things to you that you don't want done. That's not the way love works. It's got infinite patience and infinite lifetimes. You can take as long as you need. All right? So, A Course in Miracles teaches that a sin is not something that's inherently wrong with us, or the fact that we're born damaged or imperfect or unwhole. It teaches us that a sin is a mistake in thinking, right? And the mind is a powerful thing. So the mind is constantly focused on creating what it is focused on, yeah? And whether it's focused on fear, whether it's focused on love, it is creating that, okay? So when it's creating lovelessness in the world, it brings suffering on us and on the people who are near us. Does that make sense to everybody? Marianne Williamson says that, she was walking through town and she realized, there's no devil out there. There's no evil. There's no real darkness, not in the real world. It's all in my head. And she was happily walking down the street, aglow with the light of 1,000 fairies, and then realized that's actually the worst place it could be, right? Because none of us really think of it that way, but we all have a tendency to lovelessness inside ourselves, to think without love. And from that thinking without love and the birth of judgment comes all of our own suffering. So a sin is a mistake in thinking that would create deep suffering for ourselves and others. Now, because of different kinds of religious exploitation, that's been basically changed to you are being punished for your mistakes. Does that make sense? Mistakes do not require punishment, they simply require correction. Okay? But the same way that if I keep making a mistake over and over again, there's only so much number of times I can make a mistake before I can't undo what's been done. Does that make sense to everybody? And that's the other key concepts of A Course in Miracles. One is that we talked about the holy instant. We talked about prayer, we talked about miracles, we're going into forgiveness and atonement now. So A Course in Miracles teaches us that forgiveness is literally a shift in perspective. It's a remembering that only love is real. Okay? You ever been fighting with a partner and gone, oh my God, this is a nightmare? Yeah? This isn't happening. This can't be real. Because it's not. Right? When in our anger, we speak truth. It's not. It's not who they really are. It's not who you really are. You're in a nightmare. You're in an illusion. Right? Anybody ever heard of juniper oil? Or juniper, yeah? It's used for treating nightmares. So if you're ever stuck in a nightmare, which means a very stubborn belief system or pattern, get your hands on some juniper. It really, really helps to clear that stuff up. But in that moment where you are seeing an illusion, you are caught in that nightmare, and it is all encompassing, because when you're asleep at night and you have a nightmare, do you know you're having a nightmare? Not unless you practice lucid dreaming. Does anyone in this room practice lucid dreaming? There's a high chance considering what my husband does, yeah? So I practice lucid dreaming on a regular basis. So if you do, you'll know that when you first start practicing lucid dreaming, you have to earn different levels of lucidity, which is the ability to change things in the dream. In the beginning, you just know you're dreaming. And then that transforms into the ability to change the dream, to move out of a dream entirely into a different kind of experience, to call different experiences or people or emotions into a dream, right? So it's the same thing in the beginning, when you first start to practice A Course in Miracles, when you first start to practice metaphysics, you're aware that you're in a nightmare, but you don't have the spiritual or emotional musculature to do anything about it, right? How many times have you had a same nightmare and not been able to change the nightmare? Yeah, for many people it happens quite often, because there's a level of skill required. There's a level of stillness of mind and heart. There's a level of presence that you have to bring, which is just light to that situation that allows it to transform. So it's developing patience, and oh, thank you for that one. Patience is another one of my favorite phrases in A Course in Miracles. The Course in Miracles says, infinite patience brings immediate results. Right? Because it's complete detachment. Infinite patience is complete detachment. And the moment you detach is the moment everything comes. Right? So infinite patience brings immediate results. But that's really hard when someone's just made the same mistake they've made with you 16 times in a row. And it's either costing you something, or it's hurting you in some way, or you're watching them hurt other people. Does that make sense to everybody? Yeah? So when you're doing forgiveness with yourself or with others, forgiveness is not just saying this isn't real. Forgiveness is recognizing that whatever that person is doing could never hurt who you really are. Who you really are is, like we said, is bigger than the roots of this planet. Who you really are is a humongous being. You're at one with the divine nature of the universe. You are part of the thing that is holding the planets in the sky at the moment. And that same force that's holding the planets in the sky and revolving us around the sun and turning oak trees, seeds into oak trees, and embryos into babies, is not sitting there wondering how it's going to solve your problem. It's not saying anything like that, I can keep planets in the sky, but Sky's problem, Kelly's problem, it's too good for me. I can't, I'm bested. I'm going to have to sit on my hands out for this one, right? The only part of us that's blocking the miracles is the part of us that thinks that way. Does that make sense? We block our miracle from coming in because we think that there is no solution, right? So it's not that there is no solution, it's that, have you ever been inside the kitchen cupboard and you're looking for the salt and you're looking for the salt and the salt is right there but you can't see the salt? It is exactly that experience. When we have a situation, whatever it is, your prayer will always be answered. But if you're constantly saying, it's not going to be answered, no one ever helps me, nothing ever works out, then you won't be able to see the answer. The solution won't be there. Does that make sense? And it won't be there because of the lovelessness inside that space. Right? So we live in a culture that when it comes to forgiveness, it's very trendy nowadays. What do you want in that relationship? What kind of job do you want? What kind of relationship do you want? What do you need? Are you getting all your needs met? Does that make sense? Yeah? And it sounds really good until you think about it, right? Because if you're getting up in the morning and you're only thinking about what you need, and if your needs are getting met, then you can't be surprised when you're not relating to other people very well, right? It's that you can't talk about the principles of A Course in Miracles or the principles of Spirit without moving from an I to an us, without moving from an I to a we, right? And that's what happens within the principles of A Course in Miracles. Is it says, okay, forgiveness is that moment where you recognize that the only thing that is lacking in this space is what we are not giving. Does that make sense to everybody? Yeah? And the only time that a miracle can happen is when our minds and our hearts are joined. And it takes time to do this. Forgiveness can be a gradual process, but it happens in an instant. It's like water. You ever watch water boil? Sometimes you're boiling for a cup of tea or something. And the moment that the water becomes steam, it happens in an instant. The moment it hits 100 degrees, water, steam. Right? It was water, and then instantly it's steam. And forgiveness, it's the same thing. It's that dense emotional energy, and then instantly it's gone. It's released. Right? It might take us a long time working up to that moment of forgiveness, but forgiveness, like everything else, whether it's patience, whether it's trust, whether it's peace, it happens in an instant. It happens in the holy instant, which is what we were talking about earlier. What's difficult is not the principles that A Course in Miracles teaches, or the principles the metaphysics teach. What's difficult is overcoming our resistance to practicing those principles on a regular basis. Yeah? So does anybody, if you said does anyone have the Course in Miracles? Yeah? And how long has it been sitting on your bookshelf or under the bed?
I read the first chapter when someone bought me the book, and then or the first couple of chapters, and then I remember crying, and then it went back on the shelf.
How long has it been on the shelf?
6 months.
And
So
you?
about a year.
She says a present. They opened it and I closed it and I and probably I've got it for almost a year now.
Marianne Williamson, the first time she got A Course in Miracles, she opened it, closed it, and then it was only a year later when she was on her knees that she picked it up and read it. Because we know that the truth will set us free, but first it will piss us off. Because that fearless moral inventory, that looking at ourselves first, that seeing what we are not giving, that recognizing that in that moment, I'm not being loving or kind, I'm being spiritually superior. I'm not being patient, I'm being aggressive and I'm rushing that person. I'm not being loving, I'm being impatient and self-centered. Those are things that are hard to sit with, and that unless you know that you are light, unless you know that the truth of who you are is love, you can't be with that. You can't be with that and not hurt yourself. You can't be with that and not hate yourself. Does that make sense? And A Course in Miracles says, you cannot bring the light to the darkness, you have to take the darkness to the light. And what it means by that is that you have to use the process of atonement. You have to be willing to be 100% responsible for what you are creating in that space. Does that make sense? And who you were yesterday is not who you will be tomorrow, is not even who you will be this evening, is not who you will be next week. So the argument that I had with my husband this morning, I may have been weak, but tonight in that same situation I will be strong. The other week when I lost my patience with someone, I may have lacked patience. This time I will be at peace. Because that's the muscle that atonement brings to you. It's the same thing as if you work out. If I do my yoga, and I started doing weights recently because I want to do my handstand, right? And I'm quite, I'm not very heavy, but I'm heavy enough. And my arms are just not trained to lift my kind of weight, right? So I can do a headstand, but when I try and do a handstand, it's a disaster at the moment, right? So I thought, okay, I'll do weights until I can lift my own body weight. And then when I can lift my own body weight, a handstand won't be so hard because my arms will be able to take the weight. And it's exactly the same thing with forgiveness. It's exactly the same thing with patience. It's exactly the same thing with loneliness. When you start, you have to build emotional musculature. So when you work out so your body will become strong, so it will be able to hold out more. And you use the resistance, right, of the weights to give you that strength, okay? And what it's teaching you is how to be strong and how to be flexible at the same time. When you meditate so you'll be able to stay still and not become insane in the presence of that emotional heaviness, in that presence of that energetic heaviness, in the presence of that energetic weight. Does that make sense? Right? But there are levels of practice. So if on the first day at the gym, I walk to the very back of the gym and I try and do the heaviest weights, I'm going to get hurt. Does that make sense? And I'm going to think that working out doesn't work. I'm going to be like, this is daft, I just hurt myself, and I might do some serious damage, I might pull a disc or something dumb like that, right? And I will watch other people doing weights and go, but they can do it. But because we're so lacking in emotional education, we are a culture that's so full of emotional ignorance, we don't see emotional strength. We think it just happens. We think some people are strong and some people aren't strong. That's like saying someone that goes to the gym every day is just fit, and people who sit on the couch all day are just unfit. It just happened. There's no cause and effect. Does that make sense to everybody? Right? So and the Course in Miracles teaches about cause and effect, what we were talking about earlier, and the only way to change the effect is to change the cause. So if we are emotionally weak in particular areas, if we don't have patience, if we are tough on the people that we love, if we are tough on ourselves, if we're struggling with anger, if we don't know how to forgive, these are weights. Okay, and you're going to have to start off lifting 5 kilograms or 2 kilograms before you can lift 10 kilograms, before you can lift 12 kilograms. Does that make sense to everybody? And that doesn't mean there's something wrong with you. And the fact that, your friend can lift 10 kilograms already doesn't make them more enlightened than you. It just means they've practiced more than you. Does that make sense? So when I put up the lecture for today and I decided to call it The Basics of A Course in Miracles, I didn't put that up because the basic principles of the Course are any less advanced than the advanced principles of the Course. Because they're not. The basic principles of the Course are pretty much the same as the advanced principles of the Course. The only difference between an advanced student and a beginner student is the level at which an advanced student is able to apply the principles in their daily life. Okay? That doesn't change. These are principles that you will literally practice your entire life. They don't get old. Some people make me laugh. I have quite a few clients who've come in and they've gone, and I go, they ask me, what do you do and what's your practice? And I say, well, I clear my energy every day and I do A Course in Miracles. And they go, I did that. Like it's something you read and then it's done. And it's the same thing as saying, I worked out 3 years ago. There's no understanding that the continuation of the process is not a mark of weakness. That this is not an exercise in intellect, it's not a competition. I've done this and I've done this and I've done this. That spirituality is so much more than an intellectual understanding. Does that make sense to everybody? That's why you never hear any of the Christians saying, I'm not going to Easter service this year because I've heard that Easter story 1,000 times. It's just getting old. I don't want to hear the same story again. Right? And the reason they don't say that is because there's an understanding that that story is a metaphor for a type of spiritual growth, a type of redemption. So this is another principle of A Course in Miracles, which is the principle of redemption or the principle of salvation. Okay? So after you've been lonely or depressed or angry, and you pray for help, so you pray for a miracle, and then you have those things come up, and you're like, okay, fine, I see what I'm doing, I'm willing to change, I'm willing to commit to having that shift in perspective from fear to love. Please take this from me. And the universe will start to bring you people normally, people who've already mastered this. People who don't have the same wound you have, people who behave differently in that situation, because to teach is to demonstrate, and modeling is how we learn. So when that person is demonstrating not having that wound, that's the fastest way of learning how to be healed. Does that make sense? But that Easter story, and the reason I brought it up, is because there's a period of personal crucifixion, as it were. There's a period of, like I said to you, but when all that stuff is coming up, you wanted to get rid of your anger, everything that could piss you off is suddenly in the building. You want to get rid of your loneliness, well, no one's called you for a whole week, right? It's that period is what the Course in Miracles calls the crucifixion. It's like in Christianity where they say it's our cross to bear. Does that make sense to everybody? Right? But in the story of, the crucifixion, there is that Jesus was crucified and he descended into hell, which is insanity or a state of suffering caused by the mind, because all stories are parables, they're all stories, right? So they go to deep subconscious symbolism for the mind. And then after 3 days, he was resurrected and he was given eternal life. Okay? Now, if you don't look at that as something literal, and you look at that as something metaphysical, as something Jungian almost, as something where every single aspect is a part of you, through no fault of its own, experienced suffering. And because of that suffering, it experienced hell, it lost sanity, it went into darkness. Does that make sense? But when Jesus was up on the cross, he wasn't looking at all the soldiers and going, "You bastards!" Right? What was he saying?
Forgive them, they don't know what they do.
They don't know what they do. Right? Now, I'm pretty sure if he'd been saying "you bastards," it would be a different story. Right? But the message is that when you are in your deepest pain, your mind is well enough trained that you can focus on forgiveness. That part of you which has been killed by your wound, whether it's your ability to feel joy, whether it's your ability to feel connection, whether it's your ability to be at peace, will be resurrected, will be brought back to life. Does that make sense? All of us experience little deaths within ourselves throughout life. It's not something we can get around. All of us experience pain. But those 3 days in between the crucifixion and the resurrection is that moment in between you saying, okay, I want to leave hell. And I pray for help and the help coming. But you have to keep the faith as the help is coming. Does that make sense? It doesn't mean you have to pretend to have faith. You just have to keep repeating. Does that make sense? You have to keep disciplining the mind. You don't have to believe it. You just have to do it. Believe that faith isn't required, because when you haven't practiced the principles of A Course in Miracles or other faiths, you won't know what faith is. You won't realize that faith is a law of the universe, and that it's basically faith is focus. It's an ancient word for focus. So you can have faith in anything. You can have faith in the worst, or you can have faith in the most beautiful things. But your mind is always having faith in something. You can have faith in your ability to succeed or in your ability to fail. But faith is the way the mind focuses itself on different things. Does that make sense? And blind faith is not blind. It's visionary. If I'm in an airplane, and suddenly, and I'm driving this airplane or flying this airplane, and suddenly I find myself in the middle of a cloud, right? I turn on my sonar. I don't act like I shouldn't need the sonar. I turn it on, right? Because that sonar tells me how to get from A to B without being able to see. Our faith is our sonar. When we're in the dark, when things are not clear, when you're in the middle of a cloud and you're flying your own airplane, the airplane of your consciousness, and you cannot see, faith is your sonar. It will guide you home. Does that make sense? Without it, you're just in an airplane flying in a cloud. And things are a bit more turbulent. You probably still come out of the cloud at some point, but the level of panic you'll experience might be going through hell before you get out of that cloud. Does that make sense? Yeah? So it's just being aware that when we become 100% responsible, that those parts of ourselves, and this is why you said you picked up the book, you opened the book, you landed in tears. It happened to me last night. I picked up the book, I opened the book, I was crying all over the place. Because it goes somewhere deeper than the conscious mind. It goes straight to some things often that we've forgotten, that we can't put into words. It's a pain so deep and so existential that it can't be verbalized. Just like love can't be verbalized. It's beyond expression. And having that pain answered, having it witnessed, having it released, that's a very powerful healing. That's why my books are highlighted and cried all over, and they have post-it notes coming out of all left, right, sides and centres, because they created for me a genuine relationship with God. I always had a very strong relationship with my angels, and it was daft of me. It never occurred to me that they would take me back to God, but of course that's what they were doing all along. But that's how much fear we have of the Creator. That's how much religious abuse has been in our culture. Is that we're taught to fear God. So when it starts to take you back to conscious relationship, to conscious contact with the divine, it's such a relief that that existential pain starts to leave, that it's possible that it can be healed. Because when you first pick up that book, 9 times out of 10, you've lost hope that it's possible. You're not even talking about it anymore. It's not a conversation you have. You know, I've never had anyone sit down on my chair when I'm doing healing or counseling and say, you know, that existential pain thing, it's a bitch. It's not even a conversation. That's the level of hopelessness. Does that make sense? And when you're having that addressed on such a deep level so well, it is an emotional release because it is the end of your suffering. It is the beginning of your self-actualization. So there's that stage where you self-actualize, and then the next stage is collaboration. Because just like the cell in the body, when I'm made into, you know, a liver cell or a heart cell or a brain cell or a skin cell, I'm delegated to a part of the body so that we can serve the greater functioning of the whole. Does that make sense? Yeah? And it's the same thing with humanity. Whether you're an artist, whether you're a musician, whether you're an engineer, whether you're an environmentalist, whether you're a spiritual teacher, you were delegated a functioning so that you can serve the greater of humanity. And that requires collaboration. It takes millions of cells to filter my blood. They have to work together to do that. Yeah? So what happens in the body when a cell goes, I don't want to do that. I don't want to contribute to the healthy functioning of the liver or of the heart. I want to do my own thing. And then it gets all these other cells to hang around with it on the side of the you know, the liver or of the heart, and it starts to grow, right? It's this sickness kind of spreads. What's that called? Yeah. And we have this malignancy in the body. We have in the collective consciousness of humanity right now. We have this completely inaccurate belief that our happiness comes from doing what our ego thinks we should do. Our happiness doesn't come from doing what our ego thinks we should do. Our happiness comes from doing what our true selves believes we should do, from following that voice of the Holy Spirit. The ego has no intention of us being happy. Has anyone here been to, it's kind of like a backwards question, I'm going to ask it anyway. Anyone here ever been to an Alcoholics Anonymous meeting or a Coda meeting? Yeah? You know how in those meetings they say that alcoholism is an insidious disease, it's a progressive disease. It doesn't just stay still, it progresses. So if an alcoholic comes in when they're like, you know, 21 or 22 and they don't do anything about their drinking, it will be worse 10 years down the line. Diseases are progressive. So if I have something, you know, if I have a broken leg and I don't set that leg, it will be worse 20 years down the line. Diseases are progressive and they're insidious. So alcoholism isn't out to inconvenience you, it's out to kill you. Okay, and ideally, if it can, it will take down the whole family at once. Okay, same thing with codependency. I'm in Coda, by the way, I'm a codependent. So if I don't proactively address my codependency, then it will try and ruin all of my relationships. It will try and bring not great things into my life. Does that make sense to everybody? So fear is a progressive consciousness. It doesn't just sit still and do nothing. It progresses over time. Okay? So when you're dealing with that level of progression, that level of insidiousness in the collective human body, it's the same thing. This idea that we will be made happy by following the idea of the ego is completely 100% insane. And it comes from, in the Course in Miracles, it talks about this as the difference between magic and miracles. Okay? And there's a lot of magic in the world at the moment. The law of attraction is very, very popular. Okay, so what A Course in Miracles would say is, magic is when you're pretty much asking God to be your errand boy. Okay, bring me that coffee, bring me that soulmate, bring me that person, bring me this thing, but there's no connection or collaboration with everything else. Does that make sense? Now, there's nothing wrong with God manifesting things or bringing things to you. Here's where the suffering lies. If you are asking the universe to bring things to you from a place of believing that you are alone and that you have to manifest this because the universe doesn't have your back and no one cares about you and the universe doesn't care about you, right? Then it doesn't matter what you manifest, it's never going to be enough. Does that make sense? Okay, that feeling of emptiness is not being addressed because everything you're manifesting is only affirming that you're still alone, is only affirming that you're disconnected from other people, is only affirming that it's all about the stuff, right? So it's what the ego says, yeah, you know, bring me all that stuff and it will make me happy. And in the beginning it's good. It can be a stepping stone to God, because sometimes when we get something, when we receive a gift, we open, our heart opens a little and something heals a little, right? But if at that point we're not willing to share it, because that's what I said earlier to you, is that nothing is given to us for our use alone. It's every gift that we have is given to us so that we can share it with one another, right? So and I was watching a talk that Marianne Williamson did for Oprah the other day, and she said that a few times she was getting ready and she heard Oprah in her own change room saying, whenever I get something amazing and wonderful, all I can think about is how to share it with as many people as possible. Right? And that's the level of consciousness that brings that kind of stuff. Because the universe, the Creator, wants to bless everyone on this planet, wants to share with everybody. Does that make sense? And what you give is what you get back. So if you're giving wonderful things, you're getting wonderful things. Does that make sense? But the universe doesn't deal with denial very well. You might be in denial, but the universe isn't. So if all you're giving out is contempt and irritation and feelings of being low, when really you're pretending to be happy, all you're going to get back is some irritated, low-feeling, depressed people. Does that make sense? And that's why the Course in Miracles says that we need the Holy Spirit. We need a higher consciousness than our own. Because in that moment where, it's what it says in the Law of Attraction, it's very hard to jump from shame to happiness. That's a bridge that has to be crossed. So when you say to a higher mind than your own, I need a divine intercession, I need a miracle here, the Holy Spirit literally becomes that bridge. Your angels literally become that bridge. They literally bend over backwards so that you can connect to that part of consciousness in an instant, instead of having to work your way up through all the emotions. Which is why sometimes we just burst into tears, because that bridge was instant. Whereas if we tried to do it ourselves, we'd have had to work our way up and work our way up. The baby isn't sitting there going, I have to become a baby, I have to become a baby, I have to become a baby. It's happening naturally. The acorn isn't saying, I have to be an oak tree, I have to be an oak tree, I have to be an oak tree. It's happening naturally. In the same way that you becoming the happiest possible self-actualized self is happening naturally. You don't have to be thinking, I want to become self-actualized. That's a sign of distrust, that's a sign of too much control. Does that make sense to everybody? That doesn't mean do nothing. That doesn't mean that your diligence, that your consciousness, that your attention, that your love and your presence won't be required, because it will. But there's a huge difference between conscious consideration and control. And you know what it is. Nobody likes being controlled. We're very, very clever things, right? And all of our minds are drawing 24 hours a day. If I'm controlling you, even if I'm doing it with a really nice smile on my face and I'm using the nicest, prettiest words on the planet and calling you sweetie and telling you how wonderful you are, you ain't gonna like me. Does that make sense? Right? So there's a lot of this pretending, this fake it till you make it mentality. And it's important, because there are many areas in my life where if you'd been here yesterday, you would have seen the amount of drama I caused with my husband before this talk. It depends what it's backed up by. It's kind of like, I think you should work out, but there's degrees, there's like qualifications to me thinking you should work out. It's the same thing. I think there's a level of practice that requires your failure. Like me doing the splits, right? I'm going to have to fail at doing the splits a few times before I can do the splits. And that doesn't mean I should give up on doing the splits. Okay? But I shouldn't pretend to practice doing the splits whilst never intending to do the splits. And that's what happens to a lot of people emotionally. They get stuck, right? They go and try to learn peace and compassion, but somewhere along the way they give up on ever learning how to be peaceful and compassionate, so they're planning on pretending forever. Does that make sense? So that's my qualification, is that when you actually are practicing something, be conscious that you're practicing something. Be conscious that you're learning patience, or you're learning mercy, or you're learning integrity. And be aware of that level of fake it till you make it, and use the bridge. Because when I'm practicing the splits and I say, okay, I have no idea how to do this. I have never had my body flex that way before. This is, for my physical body, this is a brand new thing. It's completely out of my comfort zone. It's the same thing in that moment where, I want to have patience with someone, but all I really want to do is slap them. Or they're talking and I'm like, please, just shut up. Why are you still talking? And there's those moments where I'm looking in the mirror first thing in the morning and I'm really, really not having a good day, where you need that miracle. Because those moments, no amount of pretending to be somewhere makes you be somewhere. Does that make sense? So in those moments of fake it till you make it, it's real recognizing when you stopped trying to make it and you're just faking it. Because the universe has grace to it. So if the universe knows that if you're genuinely trying to learn something new, it will have mercy upon you. You know, normally in ways that make you laugh a lot. Normally with people who will be kind and who will bring a different energy into that space. But if you're not actually trying and you're just sitting there saying, I really, I tried, it didn't work. That's normally when you get people who are kind of bitch slapping people. Predominantly because you're bitch slapping them. Energetically, you're bitch slapping the universe. And the universe kind of gives you a bitch slap back. And you're like, how did that happen? How did I meet that rude person today? And it's because on a level you don't realize how rude you're being. Does that make sense? How much you lack humility. You got to a place in the lesson that you didn't understand. Instead of asking for help, you decided to hit the teacher. Right? And that's what emotionally we do a lot. And we get away with it because we don't have much emotional intelligence in our culture. You weren't taught about emotions in school. Beyond happy, sad, you weren't taught that. So you don't, and it's not as a culture, we don't know how to have emotional integrity with one another. And that's why we lack patience. Because if I've mastered patience, for example, and my partner hasn't, I'm not going to understand why they're screaming at me. I'm going to think it's something they can just change, just like this. I'm not going to understand that it takes practice to be patient. I'm not going to understand that that's a learned skill. And I'm also not going to praise them when they are patient, because I'm going to think they should just have it mastered anyway. Does that resonate with everybody?
Something.
Yeah.
What if you're dealing with like a sociopath?
Okay, so A Course in Miracles doesn't say that you should be at the effect of other people's fears. It says that you should always give the most loving response. Now that loving response, and that's why I said staying or leaving a person is a completely different question. The most loving response is the response which means they and you get the most love from that situation. There's nothing loving about saying to someone, hey, abuse me every day. Scream at me, shout at me, put me down. There's nothing loving about allowing yourself to be at the effect of someone's lovelessness. Does that make sense? Sometimes no is the most loving response. If a little kid walks up to me and says, Mummy, can I put my hand on the stove? The answer is no, darling, you cannot put your hand on the stove. Right? No matter how many times, the answer is no, you cannot put your hand on the stove. And it's the same thing if someone walks up to you and says, hey, can I rape you? The answer is no. You cannot rape me. It's that, but it's learning to say no without being triggered, without moving into lovelessness yourself. Does that make sense? Yeah. Because the reason we say no with anger is because we're afraid that we're not going to have what it takes to stand our ground. When anger starts to melt away inside you, and I remember being absolutely terrified about this because I'm Brazilian and Brazilians are very passionate. I was born in Brazil, I was raised in Scotland. We're very passionate people, and there's been a lot of anger in my house growing up. There's been a lot of passion, there's been a lot of fire. And I was worried that if I let my anger go, I wouldn't have motivation anymore, and I wouldn't know how to stand up for myself or people anymore. And I would lose my integrity, because sometimes anger is what gives us that break from denial. It's a state break. Does that make sense? You get angry enough and you actually go, something's wrong. Something actually needs to be addressed here. That's why the ego doesn't like you having a nervous breakdown. That's why so many people in the spiritual community have a spiritual awakening after having gone through some sort of mental illness, or through some sort of physical problem, or through some financial loss. Because that moment you actually go, there is something wrong. The denial ends. Because there is something wrong. You are actually insane in that moment. Does that make sense? Until you recognize your insanity in that moment, there is no remedy, there is no salvation, because no one's going to take your free will away from you. Does that make sense to everybody? So when you're asking about a sociopath, when the anger started to melt in me, what started to replace it was integrity. And integrity is the ability to exactly be like that with a child. No, darling, you can't touch the stove 1,000 times without being like, no, you can't touch the effing stove. Does that make sense? It's, you have the courage of your convictions. Yeah.
Sorry.
But it's what happens. When we lack integrity, when we lack patience, we use a kind of emotional violence to shame people into submission. Does that make sense? And anger and the ego would have us believe that we need that we need fear to control people, that we need people on that leash to get them to do what they need to do. but you teach what you demonstrate. In the third book, the teacher's manual, it goes into the questions that are most asked and answered by students and teachers. And it says in A Course in Miracles that to teach is to demonstrate, and that whether or not you are going to teach is not the question, because you don't have any choice about that. You're teaching every day whether you want to or not. You know, every minute, every moment, all you can choose is what you teach. And you teach what you demonstrate, not what you think you're teaching, not what you say you're teaching, what you are demonstrating. Okay? So we grow in our ability to demonstrate love. So in that moment where you're faced with someone who is, like you said, a sociopath, in that moment, you, instead of going into a panic, instead of going into lovelessness, instead of going, what the hell is wrong with that person? You quiet your intellect, you turn within, you pray for their happiness, you ask that their suffering be ended. You ask for a miracle. You ask that everything that they need, every person, every book, every bit of information, everything they need to end their suffering, to break their denial, be brought into that space. And you ask what God would have you do. You ask what the Holy Spirit would have you say. You ask what it would have you do and to whom. And after that, you let go. I have people asking me all the time, when do I let a relationship go? When do I let a friendship go? When do I let my partner go? And I say, every morning. Okay, nobody likes to feel like they're chained. Nobody likes to feel like they're controlled. Every day, hand your relationships over to the care of the Holy Spirit, to the care of that divine physician, because it can take better care of that stuff than you can. The biggest areas that I get trouble with are physical health, relationships, and money. That's one of the biggest areas people don't surrender stuff to God, and it's like, oh my God, you know, that's £100,000, that's £1,000,000, I can't give that to God. I'm like, that's a large amount of money. You put it right in God's hands and you keep it there, because otherwise it's going to be in the hands of fear and bad things are going to happen to it. Does that make sense? That's why so many people, when they win the lottery, it's gone within less than a couple of years. Because instead of quieting their intellect, turning within and asking, not only how can this be of service, but how can this even just take care of me and my family, it goes through the fear mind. Does that make sense? And the fear mind says it wants you to make money, it wants you to keep the money, but really it will get you to do every single behavior possible to get you to lose the money as quickly as possible. Right? And that's what you have to watch out for. If you don't know that that force is working, then you can't be present in your stillness towards it. The lighter, the stronger your light becomes, the more your patience develops, the more your mercy develops, the more your integrity develops, the more your patience develops, the more the ego melts away, because it's darkness. And the stronger your light is, the smaller the darkness becomes. So the less it happens. And that's what we were saying about the splits. It's like in the beginning, I might be saying, you know something? You know, all I want to do is send that message or send that text. All I want to do is let that person have it. You know, they need to hear this, and they need to hear it from me, and they need to hear it from me right now. Right? And I may not be spiritually enlightened enough to be able to stop myself from having those feelings and those thoughts. I may be only enlightened enough to know that those thoughts are not going to be good. They're not going to bring me any sort of peace, and they're not going to bring that person any sort of peace, and they're only going to cause a lot of pain. So I bite my tongue and I breathe. And I don't send that email, and I don't send that text. Does that make sense? And then next time, it might be a little less intense, right? Until eventually the email or text comes in and I'm actually giggling. But it takes a while, because every time that opportunity comes in, it's an opportunity for a miracle. It's like every single time that person texts me, it's like my wound is brought to the surface. And that's the moment where I call in the divine physician. That's the moment where another layer of that wound is healed. Does that make sense to everybody? And you're not just a spiritual being whilst you're in this 3D world. You are a physical being. So, and this often comes up a lot around weight loss and around people trying to gain physical health. So if they're ill, or if they're struggling, or you know, they were born with an illness, for example, or with something like dyslexia or dysgraphia, like I was, it's in your physical body, it's in your DNA. So when you're healing it, it's going to come up in layers, because your body renews itself in layers, right? And a lot of people say to me, but I healed it and it keeps coming up. And it's like, you healed it 100%. It's just a new layer of cells. Okay? And it's going to take about a year until the cells that grow new in your body don't have that message imprinted in them anymore, don't have that fear imprinted in them anymore, because these just still have the old programming and the old DNA. And it's going to take a few months before your biology catches up with your consciousness. Because your mind, your spirit moves instantly. Miracles happen instantly. Right? Which is why when I'm working with theta healing and you work with the DNA instantly and you remove the belief from the cells instantly, healings happen instantly. But for most people, when they're working bit by bit, it's not just that healings they go in layers, it's also that that kind of change can cause serious mental damage. One of the biggest things for me, because...
Positive mental damage.
No, serious...
What kind of change?
If you've been ill for a long time, or you know, even poor for a long time, your identity is invested in that state. So you identify with being poor, you identify with being ill, and it takes time for you to create a new identity. So if if you have an instant healing and you haven't created a new identity, most people will sabotage it within a week. I did it many times. I remember when I first started healing, and this is, you know, it's funny now when I'm saying it, but at the time it was absolutely tragic. But when I first, you know, woke up, I got really ill for about 1.5 years because I was clearing so much stuff, but also because of the identity change. You know, I went from thinking of myself as a very logical, very rational, completely not spiritual person to, you know, within literally 3 days, my purpose on this planet was to be a spiritual teacher. And it was like, poof, it was a complete 180. And that's what the Course in Miracles says. It says that the teaching of, you know, the teaching of love is a complete 180. The thinking of love is a complete 180 from the thinking of the world. Right? So for me, it was really a complete 180. And I still remember my mum looking me in the eye when I came home and saying, "Who are you and what have you done with my daughter?" Because I was such a different person. And the stress of having no one intimate recognize you because you've changed so much is big. The stress of having a different identity is not a small thing. Right? Like if you go from being poor to being rich overnight, often you stop identifying with your friends, you lose a lot of friends. Because of jealousy, because of, you know, people then you're suddenly scared that people only want you for your money. Many people will leave their husbands or wives because you haven't developed loyalty. It creates a huge upheaval. Does that make sense? Some people can't handle it because they've done enough practice that it starts becoming more comfortable. Has anyone read Jonathan Livingston Seagull? If you haven't, it's a very, very good book. Look it up. It's a tiny little book, and it's about a seagull. But it's by Richard Bach. There you go. Sorry, I kept thinking Bandler in my head, and I was like, it's not Bandler. That's NLP. It's by Richard Bach, and basically one of my favorite lines inside that book is this seagull is flying along, and his whole purpose in life is to practice flying, and he's learning about spirituality through flight. And then one day he gets a dive wrong, and he flies straight into a cliff. And he, you know, wakes up with these 2 other seagulls flying on a cloud. And he looks to his left and he looks to his right and he goes, "Did I die?" And they were like, "Well, you rapidly altered your state of consciousness." And I think it's that same thing. It's like, this is what I was saying to you about deaths. You know, when we go through a massive healing or an instant healing, a part of us dies. When you're rich, the part of you that was poor dies. When you're healthy, the part of you that was sick dies. And it's a rapid altering of a state of consciousness. So unless you've got the emotional and spiritual musculature, and that does not have to be acquired in this life. Okay, some people have that musculature from having learned it in other places and other times. Okay, so don't ever judge. Some people will just make that shift and they'll be fine. That's why some people can just do it and some people can't. You know, you can throw me in a swimming pool and I can swim. I used to do competitive swimming in high school. I haven't been swimming in 5 years, but I can still swim. And it's the same thing. If you've mastered patience or mercy or kindness in another lifetime, if you've mastered grace, then instant healings will be a lot easier for you. Because those things act as a bridge. Does that make sense to everybody? Whereas if you haven't, it's a total mind screw. You're like, how the hell did that happen? How can this happen? And then the ego steps in, which is, you know, you could have healed yourself all along. It starts beating you up. Things get vicious. A Course in Miracles says that the ego is suspicious at best and vicious at worst. Okay? So it's just that awareness. Sometimes healings have to be gradual. Sometimes they don't. And I've seen both. I've seen one woman have a hole in her heart healed instantly. I healed my own wrist instantly once when I got run over by a car. And it normally happens like this. something happens, either an accident or you have a complaint that's been in you for a long time, or like me with my thyroid as well, like as long as with the car, and you go to the doctor and you've been working on healing it for a couple of months or a couple of weeks and you haven't noticed that it's been healed, right? You're still in denial about the healing. And you go along to the doctor and you say, okay, can you have a look at me? Can you take my blood, or can you check the x-rays? For me with my wrist, it was literally, I went in a week after the car accident to have a different cast put on and to have the x-ray so they would know exactly what position to set the arm in. And when they took the x-ray, they were like, this is a different x-ray, your wrist's not broken. And I was like, oh, trust me, it was broken. It was really sore. They were like, no, it's not broken. There must have been a mistake with the x-ray, right? And the same thing with the thyroid thing. I went in for a blood test and they were like, yeah, you don't have a thyroid problem anymore. It never had a problem, it's probably a misdiagnosis. So normally that's what they say. It's a misdiagnosis, it was diagnosed wrong. But when you're ill, you know it. When your body is hurt, you know it. With underactive thyroid, I was exhausted for 10 years because of that thing. But I healed it gradually. So I healed it in about a period of about 6 months. So when it was gone, I almost didn't notice that it was gone. And denial works to protect you in healing as well as it works when you're hiding things from yourself or lying to yourself, because the truth is too much sometimes. When the doctor turned around to me and said, yeah, you don't have an underactive thyroid anymore, I started crying because I thought I was going to have to live with that for the rest of my life. I thought I was going to have to be in that suffering forever, and suddenly there was someone telling me, no, it's gone, right? But even if it had been healed and I hadn't had the doctor tell me, I would always have said I have an underactive thyroid. I would have been in denial about the healing. Because any truth that's too shocking to your identity, the subconscious mind protects us from.
Did you heal your thyroid through food, or a combination?
A combination. I had to do a lot of emotional healing for my thyroid, about expressing creativity. Louise Hay says thyroid conditions are when do I get to do what I want to do? So it's normally you live a life which is all about other people. And for me, everything was about my parents. My career was about my parents, my studying, my friends, everything was for them. And when I shifted that, when I started doing things for me, and I changed my diet, because that was the other thing, when I was little, my mum, it was funny because my mum told me, I used to throw up milk. She used to try and give me milk, like cow's milk, and I used to throw it up. And they basically just kept feeding it to me. And one of the things that my angels told me the moment, I asked for help, because I was really not well. After I woke up, I was really, really not well, was, stop drinking milk, and stop eating milk, stop eating dairy, stop eating sugar, and only eat green things. My mum, I know she loves me. I mean, she loves me so much. Like, I was on a lot of antibiotics, and it were making me really a lot worse than I was. But I remember her sitting next to me, next to my wardrobe on the bedroom floor, and me saying, I'm going to stop. I can't take them anymore, and I've been told not to take them anymore. And she looked at me and she said, because she was so worried that if I came off the medication, that I would get worse, and I was already really bad. And she looked at me and she said, I'll take them with you.
Oh.
She said, we'll do it together.
Desperation.
And that's what I mean by love can be so misguided sometimes. There was nothing in her but the will to love me. But if I hadn't had the integrity to follow that guidance, I wouldn't be healthy. I really don't know if I'd be here. So being able to hear that guidance and follow that guidance is a big deal. And sometimes the whole culture, that things that are supposed to be helping you are so from that place of fear, that they don't make you be accountable for yourself. They don't make you stop and really realize where things are coming from. So for me, they asked me to change the diet, and they asked me to change, do the work around doing but that's exactly it, because all in that moment, that was such a test for me. All I wanted was to make her happy. All I wanted was for her to feel safe. And when I said, no, I'm going to do it, what my guidance is telling me, I knew she would feel disrespected. I knew she would be afraid. I knew she would be worried. And it took all of my spiritual strength to love her and to follow my guidance anyway, instead of trying to control her feelings or manage her feelings, right? And to trust that she would learn to manage her own feelings, and that she would be happier with a healthy daughter than she would be in that moment, being able to control my response and keep me safe. but that was so incredibly hard to do. Does that make sense? Yeah? So I have seen instant healings, and it does happen. It doesn't, in my experience, it doesn't happen for everyone. I wouldn't sell it as a, as a cure-all, but it does happen. If you, and I think is what A Course in Miracles says, if in that moment you are willing to take 100% responsibility, then in that moment you will have an instant healing. Does anyone have any questions about tonight, about their own life and applying the Course? Go on, sweetie.
I have like an infection in my tooth for like a year.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm going to a specialist, paying like £300, £700, and it's just not going.
Is it in the tooth or the gums?
Both.
Okay.
I think it's originated in the gum.
Okay, so normally problems in the teeth and the gums is fear of making decisions. Okay.
Yeah.
So you want to work around it's around integrity. You're working around listening to your guidance no matter what, around listening to the voice of the Holy Spirit no matter what.
Okay.
And because you're sitting here in the basics of A Course in Miracles, I would say that it's time you pick up the book.
Yeah, no, I was thinking that.
Because it will teach you how to have that integrity without moving into anger, without needing to blame, without... the vulnerability of being with that in that space it's not an easy space to be in. But yeah, it will... have you asked for an instant healing?
Kind of.
Yeah? So,
I think not as deeply as I could.
okay, so when you go home and you go into meditation tonight, quiet your intellect, turn within, connect with the Creator of all is, connect with that Holy Spirit, and ask that the Divine Physician be upon you, and ask for an instant healing. Say, Creator is commanded that I have an instant healing for my teeth and for my gums, right? And expect to be given a lot of decisions. Because that's what's going to need to heal. Within the next 24 hours, you're going to be given decisions to make. Okay? That before you would have made from a place of fear, and you're going to be asked to do them from a place of love.
Okay.
Right? And as you practice doing that, this will completely dissolve and disappear.
Okay.
And any bleeding in the gums is joylessness, so not having enough joy in life.
I don't have that. I just have this infection.
Anger as well. Okay, so anger and decisions. Next 24 hours. It's in the post.
Okay.
Anyone
You
else?
mentioned earlier about praying, and I missed a bit of it, I'm not sure. I think you were talking about loneliness. And then if you ask for that to get taken away as an example, then you get given loneliness. Is that what you were saying?
You get shown everywhere in your consciousness where you are blocking love from entering. So you get shown where you are a cause of your loneliness. Because we go, I'm lonely because the world is such a terrible place and nobody likes me and I don't fit in here. But there are things that we're doing in our subconscious mind or in our hearts that are keeping people at bay. Whether it's judging them, whether it's defending. When we're young, the predominant system in humanity is a fear system. So it becomes more natural to judge, it becomes more natural to defend, it becomes more natural to attack than it becomes to be loving. So we literally forget how to do that. That's why, it says, in the Course in Miracles, it says your job is not to seek for love, your job is to simply remove all obstacles to love's coming. But the ego says, I'm lonely because this world is fucked up. It doesn't say, okay, yeah, the world may be pretty screwed up, but you're lonely because your heart's closed. And someday, because of someone, at some point, you stop trusting other people, you stop trusting yourself. And then it will show you where it is that you've stopped allowing people in. And in that moment, if you say, okay, I'm willing to hand this over, I'm willing, that's why Louise Hay always says, I'm willing to change. It comes from A Course in Miracles. It comes from your willingness is everything. And this is what we're talking about, your free will. When the Course in Miracles talks about willingness, it's not talking about you being like, oh, I wish this might happen. I wish I could be healthy. I wish I could be good. It's talking about using your free will. You're willing it to happen. Does that make sense? So when you ask for it to be removed, you'll be shown where it is that your will is currently not in alignment with divine will, with your real will. Because your real will is to be happy, your real will is to be at peace, your real will is to feel connected with other people. No one wants to be lonely, no one wants to be ill, no one wants to suffer. not consciously. None of us do those things on purpose. It's the lack of light in that space. It's the lovelessness in that space. You know, that's why it's no use walking up to somebody and saying, you should have figured this out by now. You know, that's more lovelessness masquerading as love. Does that answer your question? Anyone else?
I know it sounds funny, but I didn't know anything about this subject before I literally came here tonight. I just came because I got an email and I thought, yeah, you know.
How come?
What's the scope of A Course in Miracles? I know it's an odd question, but I'm basically saying, what is it that you believe people can gain from it? In a more general sense, because you've spoken about a lot of very specific things.
I think the purpose of A Course in Miracles is happiness. Not superficial happiness, but real happiness. And that's what it says, you know, the more you become metaphysically advanced, the concepts don't become more advanced. They're simple. You know, in fact, A Course in Miracles says complexity is of the ego. We all want to experience love, and for humans, the word we use when we're experiencing love is I'm happy. You know, I feel good, it feels whole, I'm in the flow.
Yeah. I've had some issues with drinking, not where I end up on the street,
Yeah.
but just sort of like, you know, the desire. And I've been reading a lot of books about some kind of way you form a relationship with a thing in place of
Yep.
not getting enough of it in your life.
Yep.
And I guess this would have some relevance to that.
My experience with my own addictions, because my addictions, I don't have anything to do with alcohol, but I do like to control people. And I'm powerless over my inability to control people sometimes, hands up. I'm totally powerless. And my experience with addictions has been with sugar, has been with gluten, has been with dairy. Sugar is a bitch.
I have the same.
It is. I literally had a diabetic in here the other day who is literally about to have his foot amputated because he cannot stop. And my experience is that all addiction comes from that lovelessness. And it comes from very low self-esteem. But this is not A Course in Miracles, this is me as a spiritual teacher here. My experience is that whatever, exactly what you're saying, whatever you are addicted to, it has a consciousness and it has a voice. Okay? So if I was working with someone who was addicted to marijuana, I'd ask them to have a conversation with marijuana. If I was working with someone who was addicted to alcohol, I'd ask them to have an addiction, a conversation with alcohol. You know, for me, I had that conversation with sugar and with control. Because clarity, it's like what you're saying, it saves you having to have those things show up in an inconvenient way to break your denial. If you're open, if you say, okay, you know something, I'm going to take a deep breath and I'm going to be with the truth, you know, of what it is that I think can't be resolved. What am I numbing with this?
Because, you know, resistance can be a good tactic, but it's not helpful. I mean, it's not satisfying.
There's nothing. You know, and every instant that you're crying out for that, you know, they say every wound is a cry for love, right? Every instant that your soul is crying out for love, the universe is responding. It's just whether or not we choose to answer that call. Because that call normally means, it's what, okay, I'll give you an example with my own life, with my health. You know, when I prayed to God and I said, dear God, please make me healthy. I am 14 years old and I am sick. If I keep going this way, I am going to not make it to my 20s, never mind my 30s, right? I need help. I expected, you know, that God was going to come in and He was going to, you know, if you think about, if we use a house as a metaphor for my health, okay? I thought God was going to come in and paint the windows and doors. I thought He might, you know, sort of give me a new bathroom or something. I didn't realize my whole house was going to be gone. You know, I didn't realize all of my beliefs about health were going to be completely destroyed. And something new was going to be built in its place. So And I didn't realize I didn't know myself that well. You know, so much of my pride hinged on me knowing who I was and me knowing myself. And then suddenly this energy came along and pretty much put me on my knees and said, you don't know anything. You know, you don't know who you are, you don't know what you're doing, you don't know what you want. You're just living from that self with a small s and thinking you're living from the self with a big S. But in Alcoholics Anonymous, they say you can either save face or save ass.
I only went once, yeah, interesting.
It's just the commitment. My biggest, like for me with codependency, it took me a year to get over the denial of admitting that I was a codependent. And then it took me 3 years, and I worked the CODA steps mostly up in Aberdeen, and now I do most of my meetings online. It's really good that way. Nowadays you can pretty much do them anywhere, wherever you are. It's that insane. But my ego tried to use the meetings. So, you know, how does the ego sabotage your recovery from an addiction? So for example, for me with CODA, I would pick a meeting that was at the other side of town. I would arrive late. I would leave late. I wouldn't make time to speak to anybody there. Whilst everyone at the meeting was talking, I was judging what they were saying instead of being compassionate. And then at the end, I was telling myself that I wasn't as bad as everyone else there was, you know, that they were sicker than I was. And I didn't really need to be there. And that I was crazy for having come to that meeting in the first place. And it was actually a friend of mine, she shall remain anonymous. She's really, really lovely, and she lives up in Aberdeen. But she's been a codependent her whole life. And she never went into treatment. Because I think more people go into treatment for alcoholism than they do for codependency. And she's 76 years old. And she was on the phone to me, and I was saying I went to these meetings and stuff, and then she told me about making exactly the same decision. This is what I mean by the universe puts you next to someone who's figured something out. And it was such a gift, because at the end of her life, she was able to show me what would have happened to me if I didn't find the courage. Or what was the potential if I hadn't found the courage. Because codependency would destroy my relationships. It would never let me have a happy family. It would constantly keep me with men who were either addicted or who were incapable of loving me. And it would, like I said with my mum, it would keep me sick, because it would keep me wanting to people please, even when I knew in my heart that there was an answer. Right? So it would keep me tied down. And no one would ever say I was crazy. Everyone would always think I was loving and giving and wonderful person, and I would be dying inside.
It is very easy to put up a facade.
It's so, and people will encourage you to, because it's hard for them to be with the vulnerability of your suffering. It's easier for them to be like, oh, you're fine, than for them to be, how many people every day ask you, how are you, and mean it? You know, normally it's only intimate friends who will really call you up, or they'll say, no, you're not okay, you know? So it is that, and I don't think there's one path to recovery. I think that there are many paths. I think A Course in Miracles is one. I think Alcoholics Anonymous is one. But what I would say is that whatever path you choose, commit to it fully. Burn all the ships, because then you have to take the island. You know, don't be like, I'll do a little bit of A Course in Miracles, and I'll do a little bit of, you know, Alcoholics Anonymous, I'll do a little bit of this. Because it's what the Course in Miracles says, that actually creates more sickness. Because then you don't have a strong enough mastery of that discipline to apply it to life in different situations. So the situation comes up, and then your ego will just use it to make you feel isolated and spiritually superior or morally superior.
Yeah.
And
I don't think that I would ever consider myself over an addiction until I was indifferent to it. And I think I'd know if I was indifferent to it.
you know when you are. I'm definitely not over my addiction. I'm definitely not beyond being a codependent. I would say most of the time I'm pretty good, unless there's some sort of shock to the system. So if I'm moving house, if I have a fight with my partner, that's when I really have to watch. Anything big or dramatic, then I regress. But I think that's all of us. We're more at risk when we've bumped into something painful, because it takes us to a trauma.
You're not a recovering codependent?
I am a recovering codependent, yeah. But I don't, this is what I said, I'll say about the 12 steps exactly what I'll say about the Course in Miracles, which is, there's such depth in those 12 steps that you could work them your whole life and never master them. You know, they're not, you know, it's not like, oh, I did the steps and it's done. It's something that you use. They're tools that you practice every day, you know, to bring you joy, to set you free. It's Winston Churchill. He's got an amazing phrase that I love about discipline. And the word discipline comes from the word disciple. So it's actually learning how to be a demonstrator of love or a demonstrator of peace, which is what disciple means. But Winston Churchill said he spent the first half of his life, in his youth, hating discipline and thinking that it was all that trapped him in his world and in his body and in the limitations of life. And the second half of his life, he realized that discipline was freedom and that it completely broke all the chains that bound him. And I think for me, with my addiction, that has been my greatest nemesis, is my belief that that I know better. You know, that somehow I'm not as susceptible to human suffering as other people, and I can take more and I can handle more and I can do more. It's that inequality. You know, and it's, my ego loves to play with me. You know, some days I feel inferior, some days I feel superior, but it's a rare day when I feel equal without actually having to do my prayer in the morning and ask for feeling equal to other human beings. You know, normally it's easier to get to me by making me feel inferior. You know, you're not pretty enough, you're not smart enough, you know, you don't have enough money. So it'll start that way, but then by the end of the day, it'll have me thinking I'm smarter than other people, and why did that person say that, and that person wrote this thing on Facebook. So it's an insidious, sly little thing. But those things leave me feeling empty and funny and like there's something wrong. You know, something intangible, ineffable that's wrong. And then unless I go and, you know, pray or do a meditation or, you know, do something to quiet my mind and release that judgment, it normally, you know, it normally doesn't heal. What I would say about alcoholism, though, is have a look at the ancestral healing side of things as well, because it runs in families, just like codependency does. But I've had, you know, even last week, I had somebody in my office who came to a session with me high on cocaine and alcohol, and didn't believe they were addicted. And that's the depth of the denial. You know, it's a progressive disease, just like my codependency is a progressive disease. How many times have you seen a woman fall in love with a man who clearly has no control over himself or his addiction or his behavior, right? He's out of control, that's the definition. Okay, whether it's violence, whether it's, you know, addiction, whether it's behavior. And she will spend the whole conversation with you telling you how this man is out of control. And the next 8 to 9 conversations are the same thing about the same man being out of control, right? And her whole life becomes about controlling this one person who can't control themselves, until her world becomes smaller and smaller and she becomes angrier and angrier, and until there's nothing left, right? It's the same thing with alcohol. It's like it progresses. In the beginning, because all of us are slightly addicted to things all the time. You know, all of us have an addictive personality. You know, it's just that ability to hold that back. That's why, you know, in America, there's meetings now where they say you're doubly gifted and you do codependency and Alcoholics Anonymous at the same time. And if I was allowed to drink, because I can't, and my body really can't deal with alcohol, which I think is a genetic thing to protect me from alcohol addiction, right? I think I would definitely be enrolled in that course. As it is, I just stick with Coda. But I think the hardest thing is the denial, because your ego, it doesn't want you to know that it's out to kill you. It doesn't want you to know. It wants you to think it's just, it wants a mild river of misery running in the background. Just never enough for you to actually say, stand your ground and go, no, this does not happen anymore. You know? It doesn't want you to have a revelation. It doesn't want you to decide you're going to commit to something and then, you know, burn all those boats and say, I'm taking the island. Because you are a powerful light. You are a force on this planet. And when that starts, there's no going back. You know, and no matter how many times you fall off the spiritual wagon or, you know, the alcohol wagon, you'll get back on again, because you'll have the tools to get back on again. You know, and it's not about how many times you fall off, it's about how fast you get back on. You know, because I slip up with quota stuff every week, sometimes more than, like last night, I think I must have slipped up 7 or 8 times. Today for me was an exercise in apologizing to my husband. You know, and it's addictions and addictive behaviors like codependency, it's insidious. You will lie to yourself, you'll lie to other people.
I think the worst thing is something Todd said once about not being stuck. A warning sign was if you keep doing similar behaviours.
Mm-hmm.
I guess that's in anything. That's not just addictions. That will go across generally not being happy. That you've found some narrow path that makes you happy, and you just keep repeating it and not looking beyond that to other ways that you can be happy.
Well, there's different, like that's the thing, like a path that really makes you happy isn't ever narrow. Because like have you seen any of the Anthony Robbins films?
What should I maybe say that brings you comfort? I don't know.
I think people can use, and I think I've seen people do this with everything. I've seen people do this with A Course in Miracles, with religions, you can take a set of rules and be so strict about applying them that it becomes a form of self-punishment. You know, and that can be done with anything. And this is what I mean by why, for me, The Course in Miracles has been so influential, is because it's not what's happening, it's how you dwell in that space. So I can give you, you know, a book that says enlightening is A Course in Miracles, and you can use it to hurt yourself. Yeah, and it's the same thing with Alcoholics Anonymous. You can get these principles, but your ego can use it to guilt you and beat you up and make you feel deprived and make you feel isolated. And you know, you can use anything for love or for fear. You know, that comes down to personal integrity. But when it comes to, like you said, you know, a path, when you're applying it right, it's exactly that. You are expanding. You are constantly applying new behaviors. And you're applying new behaviors in new areas in different ways. And it might be, like for me, you know, I know I've been applying The Course in Miracles for almost 8 years now. And, you know, I'm constantly being asked to behave differently in different situations. You know, and I think that when you first start applying a set of rules, you do have to, it's like when you first start working out at the gym. When you're first losing weight, there's a period of intensity. You know, there's a period of almost, it's not obsession, but it's a period of which you take up your new assignment, as it were, with as much conviction as you were hurting yourself before. Right? So there's a period of almost, Anthony Robbins would call it immersion. You know, where you really just let go until you master that thing, until it becomes a behavior you can always refer back to. And then there's a period of almost rest. And then life starts bringing you challenges again, and then you start using, it's the practice. You know, once you know all the lessons of A Course in Miracles, it's the practice. You know, there's 365 lessons. That's an infinite number of lessons to apply, and an infinite number of possibilities to apply them with. Oh, please don't break. And you know, you're never going to get bored. You know, you're never going to get it done. It's going to be constantly expanding, constantly growing, and constantly challenging, if you're open to it. Right? But that's not just The Course in Miracles, that's life. And that's even in my relationship, like me realizing that every morning when I wake up next to a different person. That's why you don't really need more than one person. You can have more than one person, but you don't need it, because every morning I wake up next to Todd, it's not the same man. You know, same body, different being. But if I carry all of our yesterdays into today, then why the hell should he want to be with me? Because I'm refusing to be with who he is, and I'm constantly trying to be with who he was. And that's why long-term relationships suffer and decay so much, because who wants to be with someone who remembers how you humiliated yourself back in, you know, 1991? You know, who can't see you with fresh eyes in the morning. So it's the same thing. It's in China they call it beginner's mind. It's being willing to look at your practice at beginner's mind instead of I've done this, I've done this, I've done this. Because that's a form of intellectual superiority. It's boredom. You know, you see kids in cars, I'm like, I'm bored, I'm bored, I'm bored. It's like, seriously? You have your whole mind and you're bored? But to them, it's like, it's not good enough. Everything's to blame for me being bored. And I think that's part of, I would really say that with any problem, not just addiction, contempt You know, has anyone here read John Gottman?
That's such a good quote. You've got your whole mind in your board.
I've said that to many a child I was nannying for.
Imagine
You've got your,
the key.
you've got your whole mind. But yeah, you really start to realize how much, you know, I live in this, look at this space. This is a beautiful space. I have light machines, you know, full of, you know, infinite experiences, psychedelic experiences, trance experiences, the most amazing mandalas and shapes and colors. I have beautiful gongs. I have, you know, a healing center. I'm 28 years old. I am really blessed. But I'm not going to lie to you and say I haven't cried on that bathroom floor. Because the ego mind's capable of turning amazing things into nothing. Does that make sense? You know, and that's what it would do. You know, it would, and this is why I meant by it's an insidious disease. Because if I am ungrateful every day, if I treat my, you know, my space and my partner with contempt, if I wander around with the attitude that I'm not going to have this space for very much longer.
I think people, they get used to things that they got so quickly. I mean, you mentioned lucid dreams. I had a lucid dream. I had a few. But now it's almost like I didn't have them. Do you know what I mean?
I do.
You know, I'd almost feel silly talking about them. Because that was yesterday or the day before or last year or something like that.
Yeah.
And it's the same with a lot of things. You kind of get used to them so quickly. You don't always practice gratefulness for those things. You don't appreciate them.
We live in a culture that's very not it's very out of touch, and I say that literally out of touch. And what I'm picking up when I tune into you is that you're an incredibly creative person, like incredibly creative. And creativity, when it's, have you read any Brené Brown?
Who?
Brené Brown?
No.
She does talks on vulnerability. She does some amazing TED Talks on YouTube. You can go and have a look. But she talks about how creativity that's unused festers in the body, you know, and creates wounds, and how we all have creativity wounds. And normally people who are very creative, writers, artists, they have a tendency towards addiction and alcoholism.
Yeah, I've noticed that. Writers especially.
Sorry, what does again? They have a tendency towards?
Addiction or alcoholism. And the reason is, well, it can even be food, you know, it can be sugar, but because the creativity wounds are often not even of this lifetime. Many people have been killed for their art or for speaking out or for their music or for different things. Because that light is so strong, it attracts attention, you know? So they don't remember that wound. And when that wound starts to be healed, their addiction starts to go away. But the creative force is momentum. Literally, we've been talking about the creator all night, and we're literally here talking about your creativity. So you can't have a wound with the creator and it not affect your creativity. Because it's your ability to express love. God means love, that's it. You know? So it's exactly what you're saying. We're not creative. So creating is not just about, you know, getting awards or making money or whatever. It's about sitting down and drawing something. You know, it's about, you know, taking the time to make a scrapbook of your experiences, taking the time to write in a journal, taking the time to make physical contact with your memory experiences. The experiences I remember the most, and all the research on creativity shows that the people who have conscious contact with their happiness the most are people who do creative things, activities together. So my memories, my strongest happy memories of joy with my stepkids, for example, are making cookies in the kitchen. You know, I don't have to write it in a journal. It's literally, I just have to smell a cookie and I think of them. You know, with my wedding, I'm making a scrapbook. Because that felt like that to me. It felt like a day and then it was done. Right? But touching those photographs, it brings it back over and over again. You know, it reminds me of what I committed to. It reminds me of my vows. Otherwise, it's so fast. You know, and you don't really sit down and do anything. What I remember best from my wedding, other than my vows, is dancing. Which is another creative activity, right? That involves touch. Because it connects all the different parts of the mind. So for me, my experience with healing has been, you know, combine the, you know, spiritual practice with a form of creativity, and life opens like a flower. You know, things heal very quickly, but expect a few nights of like really deep existential crying on the bathroom floor.
Yeah, before I started to come into this world, you might say, I used to always have the same dream. which was that I was trying to crawl under a very, very, very low roof.
Okay.
So low, I almost couldn't
Squeeze in.
squeeze in. And then I'd wake up. And I used to have it so often, and it was so horrible. And I was recently walking through some caves in Lanzarote.
Brave man.
It was, are you serious? You want me to walk under that? It's so funny. I had one dream of it recently, but mostly it's gone, thank God. But I think it was accepting something that I just shouldn't have accepted.
I think I'm very much for the Jungian perspective on dreams, even lucid dreams. You know, I think they're all an just like this reality. You know, you're all part of me. So everything in your dream is a part of you. So like you said, there's a part of you that's so big and so heavy that it's taking up so much space that you're being forced to squeeze yourself, you know, until you almost can't squeeze through, and the pressure is enormous.
It was a horrible feeling. It was very palpable.
But like with lucid dreams, you can, if you can get lucid in the dream, you can ask, what does this mean?
Maybe you feel trapped,
Yeah.
like claustrophobia.
But there'll be a reason. There'll be a reason why, and that's what I mean. Like when with NLP, you learn how you frame things matters. You know, and a dream is a frame of a type. You know, so we look at the cause instead of looking at the effect, right? So when you ask the subconscious mind, this is the quality of questions defines the quality of answers, right? So if I ask the unconscious mind, why am I having this dream? It might tell me you feel trapped. Okay? But if I ask the unconscious mind, how can I heal this? It will show me what I'm doing that's at the effect. Does that make sense? Like how I framed it, what subconscious meaning I gave to it. And it might not come from now. It might come from before this lifetime, before you were born. It might be coming in your blood and in your bones. It might be beliefs your mum had and your dad had and your ancestors had. So you might have no way of consciously having access to what those beliefs were or how it was being framed, because it was put into you whilst you were still in the womb. You know, that's why to me dreams are so powerful, because you're carrying all of your ancestors in your body right now. You know, all of their experiences, everything that they've been through, not in your conscious memory, but in your subconscious memory. You know, when I'm in my dream state, there's a lot of different things that you know, that all these resources that are completely untapped. You know, and fear is a lot of energy. When it's transformed, oh my God, the amount of energy you suddenly have available for no reason is ridiculous. The other thing I always recommend anybody do if they're struggling with an addiction is do a liver flush. There's a really good book called The Amazing Gallbladder and Liver Flush, but you get a lot of stones in your liver from alcohol, and it's really simple. It's not a complicated flush to do, but 2 or 3, and a lot of the anger, a lot of the toxins that are being held in your liver will be thrown out. So a lot of, it's like I said about layers. The cravings don't just come from you, they come from your liver, and they come from the cells in your body that have already been used to those patterns. So the faster you can get that stuff out, the faster it will feel like you don't want to do it anymore. It's like for me with sugar, you know. If you see pictures of me when I'm, you know, 17, 16, 18, for starters, I'm really, really fat. I look absolutely exhausted, and I look old. I look like I'm older than I am now. I look like I'm 40. When I was like 14 or 15, and it's because of the amount of heaviness I was carrying in my body for myself and for other people.
Yes, I've been an anti-sugar advocate since I first came across Pure White and Deadly, which was a long time ago.
Yeah.
My sister showed me, and certainly
It kills.
A lot of people really suffer with it.
It's just like, oh, it kills. I literally have a client who's today, this evening, having his foot amputated.
Sport.
Yeah, his big toe. All this
Natural
is.
sugar's okay, just to be fine stuff.
Yeah.
Even that can be dangerous.
Does anyone else have any more questions, or can I call this night to an end, darlings? Everyone else okay?
Yeah.
Thank you so much for coming. It's been an absolute pleasure having you. Please feel free to contact me if you have any more questions about the course. I do one-to-one healing sessions with people. They last an hour and a half. They cost £50. So if you want to help applying stuff in your life, or you want healings with stuff, then I'm available for that too. Okay?
Thank you.
Thank you.